Hey guys, welcome to the Magic Dads. So today's recipe, we are gonna be doing Walt's chili and beans. Now this recipe you'll find at the Carnation Cafe in Disneyland. It's really good, it's very hearty, and it's got a lot of good flavor. Now, having said that, I do have an issue with the recipe as it's written out in the Disney cookbooks. And also, this is a recipe that's actually been included in a few of the cookbooks they've released over the years. But the issues I have are in every single recipe, and I don't know if you've tried your hand at this recipe and you're having the same issues, but I wanted to create this video to kind of work through it. You could say this is the improved Walt's chili recipe. Also, it's going to be very similar to what you'll get at Carnation Cafe because the recipe as it's written in the cookbook is a little watered down. So anyways, having said that, let's get going and let's start cooking. For this recipe, you're gonna want a good sharp chef's knife, a wooden spoon. I like to use a garlic press. Some people have said that using a garlic press can make the garlic bitter. I don't have that issue, and I find my garlic press to be quite handy. You'll need a set of measuring cups, some measuring spoons, a colander, and if you have one, it's helpful to have a kitchen scale so you can measure out your pinto beans. For cookware, there are two pieces that I'm going to use for this recipe, and that includes a stock pot. This is a 12-quart stock pot, and you definitely don't need one this big. I think an 8-quart stock pot will work just fine. I also like to use a straight-sided skillet. You can use something similar to this, or you can use a saute pan. That will work just as well. I do like the straight sides of this particular skillet because as we cook, as we add those crushed tomatoes, this will really help minimize the mess. So this recipe calls for 2 pounds pinto beans dry along with 2 onions sliced. I'm gonna make a little bit of a modification there and I'm gonna half that. Let's only use 1 pound of pinto beans dry and 1 medium onion. And instead of slicing the onion, we're actually gonna dice it. In addition to our pinto beans and our onion, we're going to need 1/4 cup of vegetable oil, 2 garlic cloves diced, 2 pounds lean ground beef, 1 cup chopped celery, 1 teaspoon chili powder, 1 teaspoon paprika. Now the recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of dried thyme, but I prefer using fresh herbs in my cooking. And lastly, 1 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes. So the first step, we're gonna wash and sort our beans, and we're gonna cover them with water and let them soak overnight. Make sure you use enough water in a big enough bowl because those beans will expand overnight. We're gonna go ahead and drain our beans and then add them to our stock pot, cover them with water by about 2 inches, and we're gonna simmer them for about 2 hours or until tender. While the beans are simmering, we're gonna start working on our chili base. We'll start by chopping our onion before moving on to our celery. So next you want 1 cup of chopped celery, which is usually about 4 stalks. I like to use the green parts only, so I trim off the ends and take off the white. And I find the best way to do this is to take your celery and just slice it right down the middle. And you'll bunch it up like this, and then you can just chop it. And we're gonna get 1 cup of our chopped celery. So while our beans are cooking, we can go ahead and start making our chili base. And we're just gonna go ahead and add 1/4 cup of oil. And we're gonna set the skillet over medium heat, and we're just gonna warm up that oil until it starts to shimmer. Once the oil begins to shimmer, we're gonna go ahead and add our onion. And our celery. We're gonna wanna cook our onion and celery until they soften and become almost translucent, which will be about 5 minutes. Now the recipe has you saute the garlic in the oil first. I don't recommend that because you're gonna run the risk of burning your garlic, which will really impart a bitter taste, and we don't wanna add that to the chili. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and add our garlic. Maybe one more of those guys. We're gonna give that a really good stir. Already you can smell that garlic. It smells so good. But as I mentioned, we wanna be really careful not to burn it. So now we're gonna add our ground beef. You can go ahead and start breaking that up. We want to cook the beef until it's lightly brown. While it does this, we can get our spices and herbs together. So the recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of dried thyme. I'm not a big fan of using dried herbs. I'd much rather use fresh. So I'm going to use fresh thyme sprigs for this, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to incorporate that into the chili. Thyme is a fairly easy herb to use. All you want to do is take the stem and run it through your fingers, leaving the leaves behind. We'll go ahead and give our thyme leaves a good chop. And once we have about 1 teaspoon, we'll go ahead and add that to our ground beef. Freshly chopped thyme, 1 teaspoon paprika, and 1 teaspoon of chili powder. We'll go ahead and give that a stir. And we're gonna season this really, really well with some salt. And a little bit of pepper. After we've added our seasonings, we're gonna go ahead and add our tomatoes. And we'll stir to incorporate. Once we've got the crushed tomatoes incorporated, go ahead, cover it, and let it simmer for about an hour. So I've seen a lot of comments from other people who have made this recipe, and they find the chili to be a bit bland, and the fact of the matter is, it is. And if you actually have a copy of Eat Like Walt, they actually have a quick little line that says Walt Disney was not a fan of highly seasoned foods. At the end of the recipe, you'll see a cook's notes that allows you to kind of play with different options on various seasonings, and that can include ground coriander, fennel seeds, chili seeds, ground ginger, cloves, and cinnamon. I've actually made this recipe both ways, and trust me, it needs those additional seasonings. So we're gonna go ahead and add those to our chili right now. The recipe, they recommend about 1/8 of a teaspoon for each of those. You don't have to use all of them. You can just pick and choose to your liking. All right, so it looks like our chili base is done. Remember, we're simmering our beans for 2 hours and the chili base for 1 hour. So if you've timed this just right, they'll be done at the exact same time. Now there have been some videos that I've seen where they'll actually take the chili base and just add it right into their stock pot with the cooking pinto beans. So that's gonna include your pinto beans, your sliced onions, and all that water. And that's gonna give you a really thin, soupy consistency that I don't really like, and I don't think that's what we want with this chili recipe. So I'm gonna show you how I do it. Now remember, our sliced onions, first of all, they're not sliced, they're chopped. They're not in our pinto bean water. They've actually already been sauteed with our celery. So I'm gonna take this Asian strainer, it's sometimes called a spider, and I'm actually going to just go ahead and take my pinto beans and slowly add them to my chili. You can hear Caleb in the background. He's getting hungry for this. And as you can see, by slowly adding the strained beans into our chili base, you're gonna get this really good, thick, hearty chili. And it's more in the style of what they serve at the Carnation Cafe. Now you don't have to add all your beans. You can just add as much as you'd like based on your personal preference. I think this is looking really good, and this is the way I like my chili. This has a really good consistency. I'm gonna go ahead and season it with just a little bit more salt and just a little bit of pepper. So let's go ahead and give this a little taste. Make sure it's seasoned properly. It's very good. And as you can see, Caleb's at my feet. He cannot wait to try this chili. It's going to be delicious. Now, it's said that Walt Disney enjoyed this dish with some soda crackers, and that's great. You can absolutely do that. I prefer a good crusty piece of bread. There it is, Walt's chili and beans. And from our magic family to yours, enjoy.